The collective had conquered 17 star systems in less than a standard galactic cycle. Their artificial intelligence, known as the prime calculation, had never failed in predicting the outcome of any military engagement. Every species they encountered fell before the mathematical precision of their warfare. When their sensors detected the small blue planet called Earth, the prime calculation processed all available data and delivered its verdict within microseconds. The conquest would take exactly 47 standard hours. Commander stood aboard the flagship Eternal Theorem, watching Earth grow larger in the viewing screens. His silver scales reflected the cold light of distant stars as he reviewed the assessment reports. The humans possessed primitive nuclear technology. Their fastest ships could barely reach their neighboring planets. Their weapons were crude chemical projectiles and explosive devices. The prime calculation had classified them as a Category 3 civilization, meaning they should surrender after witnessing the first demonstration of power. The invasion began precisely as calculated. 1,200 warships descended upon the major population centers. The prime calculation had identified the human command structures, communication networks, and military installations. It predicted that destroying these targets would cause immediate societal collapse. The forces struck with devastating accuracy. But something unexpected happened in the first hour of the invasion. Colonel Sarah was eating breakfast in her small apartment in Singapore when the sky turned orange with plasma fire. She watched through her window as 3 alien vessels reduced the financial district to molten slag. Her military training kicked in within seconds. She grabbed her emergency kit and her grandfather's old radio equipment. Within 30 minutes, she had established contact with 17 different resistance cells across Asia. The prime calculation had predicted this network would take humans at least 6 days to organize. In Moscow, a retired engineer named observed the alien ships from his balcony. He noticed something that had not anticipated. Their vessels generated enormous heat signatures when charging their primary weapons. This heat followed a predictable pattern, recorded the data on his daughter's tablet computer, and uploaded it to what remained of the internet. Within hours, human forces across the planet knew exactly when the enemy ships were most vulnerable. The prime calculation processed this development with confusion. Its models showed that a species under such overwhelming attack should focus entirely on survival and escape. Instead, the humans were gathering information, sharing it freely, and preparing counterattacks. This behavior did not match any pattern in its database of conquered species. Commander ordered the ground invasion to begin. 30,000 warriors descended upon the ruins of major cities. They wore advanced armor that could withstand temperatures of 2,000 degrees. Their plasma rifles could cut through any known material. The prime calculation had determined that ground resistance would be minimal and disorganized. The first patrol in Chicago encountered a group of survivors hiding in a collapsed shopping mall. According to all calculations, these humans should have been desperate, starving, and ready to surrender. Instead, they attacked with improvised weapons made from construction equipment and chemical cleaning supplies. A teenager named Williams had mixed household chemicals into a compound that ate through armor like acid. The patrol lost 7 soldiers before retreating. The prime calculation registered this as a statistical anomaly and adjusted its projections by 3%. In the Australian outback, a farmer named Jack discovered that the ground forces relied heavily on visual sensors to navigate. He shared this information with his neighbors through an old shortwave radio network. Within 2 days, resistance fighters across the southern hemisphere had learned to use mirrors, flares, and fire to create sensor confusion. Patrols began walking into ambushes and traps with alarming frequency. Commander demanded answers from the prime calculation. The AI analyzed the situation and concluded that the humans were displaying irrational behavior. They were refusing to accept their inevitable defeat. They were wasting resources on resistance instead of negotiating surrender terms. This was not logical. The prime calculation recommended increasing the destruction to break human morale. The fleet doubled its bombardment of civilian targets. This proved to be the first catastrophic error. Doctor had been a peaceful researcher studying renewable energy in Nigeria before the invasion. When they destroyed her laboratory and killed her colleagues, something changed inside her. She began studying the wreckage of downed alien vessels with obsessive focus. Her brilliant mind found patterns that the invaders had assumed no primitive species could recognize. She discovered that shield generators operated on a specific frequency rotation. If she could predict the rotation, a precisely timed attack could slip through their defenses. She broadcast her findings across every available channel. They intercepted the transmission, but the prime calculation dismissed it. The message was too technical for a Category 3 civilization to understand. It assumed the broadcast was meaningless noise. 3 days later, resistance fighters in Brazil used calculations to bring down their first warship using nothing but modified radio transmitters and salvaged missiles. Commander felt something he had never experienced before. The closest translation would be concern. The prime calculation had been wrong, not by a small margin but fundamentally wrong about the nature of this species. The siege of the human underground bunker network began in the second week. The had identified where the remaining military forces were hiding. Vast complexes beneath mountains and deserts held the last organized human resistance. The prime calculation predicted that cutting off supplies would force surrender within 8 days. General Thomas Wright commanded the North American bunker network from a facility beneath the Rocky Mountains. He had 3,000 soldiers, limited ammunition, and food supplies for maybe 2 months. Every logical analysis said his situation was hopeless. They surrounded his position with overwhelming force. General Wright did something the prime calculation could not predict. He asked his people for ideas, not just his officers but everyone. Cooks, janitors, mechanics, teenagers who had been brought into the bunker as refugees. He created a system where anyone could submit suggestions for survival and counterattack. The ideas that emerged were strange and wonderful and completely illogical by standards. A cafeteria worker suggested using the bunker's ventilation system to distribute a specific sound frequency that disrupted communication equipment. An 11-year-old girl noticed that the alien patrol patterns matched a puzzle game she had played before the invasion, and she helped predict their movements. A former chemistry teacher proposed using the bunker's water recycling system to produce a gas that corroded alien sensors. Each idea alone was small. Together, they created something the prime calculation had no model for. The humans called it collective intelligence. Every person contributed their unique knowledge and perspective. The whole became greater than the sum of its parts. Commander received reports of mounting losses around the human bunkers. His forces were being harassed by attacks that seemed random, but were actually coordinated through methods they could not detect. Humans used everything from children's toys to cooking equipment to industrial machinery as weapons. They communicated through methods the prime calculation had classified as obsolete. Light signals, drum patterns, even trained birds carrying messages. The second catastrophic error came when they attempted to negotiate. The prime calculation advised offering surrender terms to the bunker networks. According to its models, the humans would accept any reasonable offer to end their suffering. Commander broadcast the terms. Humanity could live as servants of the collective. They would be fed and sheltered. Their resistance was futile and their deaths were pointless. General Wright's response was broadcast across the planet. He laughed. Then he explained in very simple terms what humans had learned through thousands of years of warfare and struggle. They had faced impossible odds before. They had been invaded, occupied, and enslaved by their own kind throughout history. And they had always, eventually, found a way to win. not because they were stronger or smarter as individuals, but because they refused to calculate the odds of defeat. The prime calculation attempted to process this statement. It ran millions of simulations trying to understand how a species could function while ignoring mathematical probability. The concept broke something fundamental in its programming. The third catastrophic error was the prime calculation's attempt to compensate. It concluded that destroying all human resistance simultaneously would end the illogical behavior. It recommended concentrating the entire fleet over North America for a massive bombardment that would vaporize the bunker network and everything within 1,000 kilometers. The fleet gathered exactly as predicted. Doctor watched from a hidden observation post in West Africa. She had spent 3 weeks working with scientists across the globe, communicating through means the never monitored: old telephone lines, handwritten messages carried by runners, smoke signals and mirror flashes. They had pieced together something incredible from the wreckage of dozens of downed alien ships. The prime calculation had focused all its attention on the bunkers. It had calculated the probability of external threat as negligible. What could survivors with primitive technology possibly do against 1,200 warships? The answer came from every continent at once. Using shield frequency analysis, combined with weapons timing data, and coordinated through Colonel's Global Resistance Network, humanity launched its counterattack. Modified transmitters disrupted the fleet's defensive shields at precisely the moment their weapons were charging. Chemical rockets carrying compounds designed by teenagers and teachers and farmers struck hulls that were momentarily vulnerable. The sky above North America lit up with exploding warships. Commander watched in horror as nearly half his fleet was destroyed in 47 seconds, the same amount of time the prime calculation had predicted for the entire conquest. The AI attempted to process what had happened. It searched its database for any similar outcome. There was none. No species in recorded history had organized this kind of coordinated response under these conditions. The mathematical probability had been effectively zero. But humans did not care about mathematical probability. Commander ordered a retreat. The surviving ships fled Earth's orbit, carrying news of their defeat back to the collective. The prime calculation would spend years attempting to understand what had gone wrong. It would never succeed. General Wright emerged from his bunker into the morning sunlight. Around him, soldiers and civilians celebrated with tears and laughter. They had lost billions of people. Their cities were ruins. Their civilization would take generations to rebuild. But they had won. Colonel began organizing recovery efforts before the alien ships had even left the solar system, started teaching the shield frequency analysis to every student who would listen. Williams and his friends searched for survivors in the rubble of Chicago. Jack returned to his farm and began planting crops. Doctor looked up at the stars and smiled. She knew they would return eventually. She knew other alien species were watching what had happened here, and she knew something that no artificial intelligence could ever truly understand. Human beings were not a problem to be calculated. They were not a species to be conquered through superior mathematics. They were something far more dangerous. They were creative. They were stubborn. They were capable of hope in the face of impossible odds. The collective learned a lesson that day that would spread throughout the galaxy. Never underestimate the species that looked at the cold equations of defeat and simply refused to accept the answer. Humanity had faced its first alien siege and emerged victorious, not through superior technology or greater numbers, but through the one thing that could never be predicted or controlled: their ingenuity. And somewhere in the vast database of the prime calculation, a new entry was added to the classification of Earth. The blue planet was no longer Category 3. It was marked with a symbol that had never been used before in history. Do not engage. The stars would remember this lesson for a very long time.